This house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, hides a dark and horrifying secret.
To him, they weren't living, feeling, breathing individuals. They were literally just pieces of meat.
Behind its walls, one of the most brutal and sadistic killers in American history unleashed unimaginable horrors. This is the story of Robert Berdella, the man who came to be known as the Kansas City Butcher.
And then he would cut the bodies up with a butcher knife and a chainsaw.
Robert Andrew Berdella, Jr., was born on January 31, 1949, in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. From the outside, the Berdella family seemed to embody the post-war American dream. Robert S.R. worked as a die setter at Ford Motor Company, while Mary Louise was a homemaker, but appearances can be deceiving. Young Bob's childhood was far from idyllic. Severe nearsightedness forced him to wear thick glasses by age 5, making him an easy target for bullies. A speech impediment further isolated him from his peers. But perhaps the most significant influence on Bob's life was his father.
His father worked at the Ford Motor Company. His mother was a homemaker, so they were very much the traditional American nuclear family.
Robert S.R. was a strict disciplinarian. The leather strap was his tool of choice, leaving not just physical scars but emotional wounds that would never fully heal. Bob's father often compared him unfavorably to his more athletic younger brother, Daniel. This constant criticism and lack of affection planted seeds of resentment and a deep-seated need for control that would later manifest in horrifying ways. In response to his tumultuous home life, Bob retreated into solitary hobbies like coin and stamp collecting. He excelled academically, showing a particular interest in art and history. But these achievements did little to win his father's approval or alleviate his sense of isolation. 1965 was a pivotal year for 16-year-old Bob Berdella. On Christmas Day, his father suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of 39. The loss was devastating, and Bob's relationship with his quickly remarried mother became strained.
Berdella's father died of a heart attack when he was 16, and this did have quite a significant impact on him because his mother remarried and she went on to set up another home with somebody else. And I think that Berdella really did feel a sense of rejection here. He was part of his mother's past. The world had moved on and he was left behind.
It was also in 1965 that Berdella saw a film that would leave an indelible mark on his psyche, The Collector. This movie, about a man who kidnaps and imprisons a woman he admires, sparked something dark within Berdella. Years later, he would cite it as a significant influence on his crimes. In 1967, at 18 years old, Berdella left Ohio for Kansas City, enrolling in the Kansas City Art Institute. Away from the watchful eyes of family and childhood acquaintances, Berdella began to explore his identity more freely. It was during this time that he realized he was gay, a fact he initially kept secret in the conservative Midwestern environment. But this period of self-discovery was marred by troubling behavior. Reports from this time indicate a dark turn in Berdella's interests. He engaged in animal torture, decapitating a duck and experimenting with sedatives on a dog. He dismissed these acts as artistic expression, but they were clear warning signs of the horror to come. These weren't just youthful transgressions. They were red flags pointing towards a dangerous path. Berdella's time at the Art Institute was cut short when he was arrested for selling drugs to an undercover officer. He received a suspended sentence, but the incident marked the beginning of a life increasingly lived in the shadows. As Berdella entered adulthood, he seemed to settle into a life of respectability. He worked as a successful chef, even co-founding a training program for aspiring cooks. Later, he opened an antique store called Bob's Bazaar in Kansas City's vibrant Westport district. To his neighbors, Berdella appeared eccentric but helpful. He was active in the local crime prevention and neighborhood watch association. He took in lodgers, often young men struggling with addiction or homelessness, claiming he wanted to help them turn their lives around. But behind this facade of normalcy, a monster was emerging. July 5, 1984, marks the beginning of Berdella's known killing spree. His first victim was 20-year-old Jerry Howell, a friend Berdella had known for some time.
When the victim became virtually unconscious, Berdella would inject him with drugs, giving him absolute control over the body. He would then repeatedly rape the victim over a very extended period, in this case, 27 hours.
Over the next 4 years, Berdella would go on to torture and kill at least 6 young men. His victims, all between the ages of 18 and 22, were often vulnerable individuals, male sex workers or acquaintances struggling with addiction. Berdella's modus operandi was chilling in its methodical nature. He would lure his victims to his home, then drug them with alcohol, sedatives, or even animal tranquilizers. Once incapacitated, the true horror would begin. In his basement, Berdella had created a torture chamber. Victims were restrained to a bed with piano wire, subjected to unimaginable torments. Electric shocks, beatings, chemical injections. Berdella's cruelty knew no bounds. He would keep his victims alive for days or even weeks, methodically documenting their suffering. Perhaps most disturbing was Berdella's meticulous documentation of his crimes. He kept detailed logs of the torture he inflicted and took Polaroid photographs of his victims. These logs and photos, later discovered by police, revealed the full extent of Berdella's depravity. He recorded every act of torture, every injection, every scream. The Polaroids captured his victims in various stages of torment and death, a grotesque catalog of human suffering. But how did Berdella manage to carry out these heinous acts for so long without detection? The answer lies in a perfect storm of circumstances. Berdella targeted individuals who were often already estranged from their families or living on the fringes of society. Their disappearances were less likely to raise immediate alarms. Moreover, when concerns were raised, Berdella's standing in the community as a business owner and member of the neighborhood watch allowed him to deflect suspicion. The 1980s also saw a surge in the crack cocaine epidemic, leading to an increase in transient populations and individuals engaging in high-risk behaviors. In this chaotic environment, Berdella's victims could easily fall through the cracks. Berdella's reign of terror finally came to an end thanks to the bravery of 22-year-old Christopher Bryson.
So Christopher Bryson was wandering the streets when Robert Berdella picks him up, and he offers him a beer, and they drive around in his car for a while. Berdella then says, well, come back to my house and you can have a beer there. So Christopher agrees and they go back.
On March 29, 1988, Bryson became Berdella's captive. For 4 days, he endured unspeakable torture. But on April 2nd, while Berdella was at work, Bryson saw his chance. He managed to free himself from his restraints and, naked except for a dog collar, jumped from a second-story window to freedom. When law enforcement entered Berdella's house, they uncovered a scene of unimaginable horror. The basement, where Berdella had carried out his heinous acts, was filled with instruments of torture. But it was the collection of Polaroid photos and meticulous logs that truly revealed the extent of Berdella's crimes. Over 200 photographs depicted Berdella's victims in various stages of torture and death.
We discovered several hundred, probably 200 to 300 Polaroid photographs that he had taken. Some of the people in the photographs were in obvious signs of being tortured.
As investigators dug deeper, the full scope of Berdella's atrocities came to light. The remains of his victims, dismembered and disposed of in trash bags, were never fully recovered. But the evidence found in his home, including skulls buried in the backyard, painted a clear picture of his guilt. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Berdella struck a deal. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he provided a full confession, detailing his crimes in gruesome detail. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But Berdella's time behind bars would be short-lived. On October 8, 1992, just 4 years into his sentence, Berdella died of a heart attack. He was 43 years old. The Berdella case sent shockwaves through Kansas City and the nation. The idea that such horrific crimes could happen in a seemingly normal community committed by someone who, on the surface, appeared to be a productive member of society was deeply unsettling. The story of Robert Berdella forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the society we live in. Experts point to a combination of factors in Berdella's case: childhood trauma and alienation, a domineering father figure, early experiences of sexual assault, and a psychological need for control and dominance. But these factors alone don't explain the extreme nature of Berdella's crimes. His case continues to be studied by criminologists and psychologists, serving as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind a facade of normalcy. In the years since, Kansas City has worked to heal from this trauma. The house on Charlotte Street, once known as the House of Horrors, was demolished. The house is gone, but the echoes of Robert Berdella's atrocities still linger. For the residents of Kansas City, the scars left by his crimes are not so easily erased. They speak in hushed tones about the man who lived next door, the man they thought they knew, but who hid a monstrous secret behind closed doors. People still talk about it, you know. They say you can feel something when you walk by that place. Like the air gets heavy, and you can't help but think about those poor boys. It's like they never left. Like they're still there, trapped in that awful place. And so, the legend of Robert Berdella continues to haunt the collective memory of Kansas City. The man, the monster, who turned his home into a chamber of horrors, may be gone, but the darkness he brought into the world remains. It lingers in the whispers of the wind, in the shadows that stretch long at dusk, in the silence that falls over the empty lot on Charlotte Street. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some evil can't be buried. And while Berdella is gone, the question remains how many more like him are out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the next opportunity to unleash their horrors upon the world. Sleep well. And remember, you never really know who your neighbors are,